So this is our second week. I've got Pastor Glenn Packiam, Reverend Dr. Glenn Packiam, the lead pastor of New Life Downtown and the associate senior pastor of New Life Church, a dear friend of mine. And Glenn, today we want to talk about kind of a sensitive topic. These are folks who they've been in the trenches. Yeah. They are laboring, they're ministering, they're doing this stuff. And on the one hand, to quote the King James, promotion cometh not from the east or west, but promotion cometh from the Lord. And at the same time, I'm reminded of passages where I think of the parable where Jesus seems to almost condemn or judge the guy who takes the talent and hides it and buries it. Yeah. And so let's talk just for a few minutes about that tension between trusting God to raise us up in ministry opportunity and at the same time being faithful to invest and steward and use the gifts and the callings and the passions we have. Yeah. I know you, we've known each other for many years now. You were a young worship leader, Christian music, rock star guy, and you began to sense a call toward pastoral ministry, and you began to kind of experiment and use those opportunities.
Well, when I turned 30, I began sensing that I needed to start making a shift.
In other words, you needed to get a real job.
Well, no, I loved what I was doing. I loved what I was doing, and there are many people who go on into their 40s and 50s in worship ministry, and it's a wonderful thing. In fact, we need fathers and mothers in worship ministry. Sure. But it was an occasion for me to evaluate, is this my path? Yeah. Is this what I should do? Yeah. And began to really discern that, no, I think it's time to step into more of the teaching and lead pastoral sort of role. But I didn't know how to exactly do that. And so one of my friends, who's about 30-some years older than me, in fact, Paul Stanley, we mentioned him in the last video, Paul said, well, Glenn, why don't you do some, he called them low-cost probes.
Low-cost probes.
Where you could test out something without... basically without doing this wholesale change, you know. It wasn't going to cost you anything. You didn't have to mortgage the farm, you know. So don't quit your day job, basically. So,
I love that.
And partly, you know, Paul, I think, couldn't really believe it. He's like, you're such a great musician. Why would you want to do this teaching thing? Are you sure? You know, like, can you actually do that? And so he said, why don't you try any opportunity you get to speak? Because he asked me, he said, how much speaking are you doing? I said, well, a couple times a year I speak at the college ministry. Most other times I'm leading worship with your son. Yeah. And he said, well, why don't you try to say yes to speaking opportunities? So there were FCA groups, there were small groups, there's homeschool moms groups. Right. I mean, I said yes to anything within reason that I could, and found that I loved it.
And that's, I think, one of the keys is. I was also a young worship pastor at a Jesus Movement church in Southern California, and yet I had that same sense. I wanted to teach and preach and do something in a little different context. And so the senior pastor said, well, we've got this Tuesday morning opportunity. They had about 100 young moms who would come to the church. They had childcare, and there was this lady who also led worship, and I was the preacher. And I did that for about 6 months, you know, every Tuesday morning at 9:30, we'd have somewhere between 100, 150 young moms come. And the strangest thing happened. After that, about 6 months into it, the senior pastor asked if I would be interested in doing the Sunday night service, which was one of our main, we didn't have small groups really back in those days. Yeah. We had everything met at the main building. And suddenly I was given the opportunity to minister in this larger, much broader context, about 1,500 people. Yeah. So is that opportunistic?
It's a tricky thing, isn't it? Yeah. I think you named both of the issues up front when the way you set up this discussion.
Almost like I thought about this beforehand.
But what I heard you say was servanthood and stewardship. And I think those are the two things we have to hold in tension. Servanthood is always the posture. I mean, Philippians 2 says Jesus in his very essence, right? Everything else was more external, but the essence of who he is as a servant. And I think we always have to remain in our essence a servant. That is the essence of who we are. But there is a stewardship of saying, in what way shall I
Yes.
serve? And it's not arrogant to say, actually, I will be of the best service to the church if I can use the gifts that God has given me, and if I can function this way. It's not unlike the early apostles saying, no, actually, we will be best serving the church if we can devote ourselves to the Word of God in prayer.
Right. And so it's not wrong to communicate with your oversight, with your leadership, some of those passions and sense of calling that you have.
Yeah, the trick is going to be if you're not as clear about what those gifts are, or if those gifts are not as developed. No, so for both you and I, we're getting into the preaching role.
Yeah.
They needed to bear witness to say, actually, that is one of your gifts. Yes, and
it's easy to decide for ourselves, but it's a different thing for someone else to say, yeah, that's your gift.
That's right, and I think that's the trap in the American context: is we are self-promoters, and we declare ourselves as this is my spiritual gift. And we've heard it now, being in our seats as pastors. You hear people say, "Well, my spiritual gift is this," and I think, man, that's just the wrong way to approach it. It's much better to say, how can I serve? And then your gifts become obvious. They come to the surface. They're confirmed by many others. And then people say, you should teach, or you should speak, or you should do this or that.
So if you're talking to some of our graduate students, they're laboring. Some of them are involved in, I know one is leading a recovery ministry, and others are involved in various areas of pastoral care and ministry. And they're sensing just something deep within. They want to go beyond that. Do they communicate some of those things with their oversight?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I don't know the details of your context, right? Because sometimes those conversations don't go well.
That's right.
And sad to say, there are insecure leaders or territorial leaders who, the minute you say something like that, you're out. And I just hope that's not the case for you. But ideally, you would be able to say, I'm sensing something. And that's what happened with me and Pastor Brady's. Actually, the story's funnier than that, because I got caught doing I was taking a crew of people to scout a location for a church plant without telling anyone that I was interested in planting a church. And so Brady called me in and he said, did you take a staff member with you on like a scouting trip for a church plant? And I said, oh yeah.
Sort of, kind of.
And he said, hey, you can't do that. Like, you can talk to us. You can't just be recruiting our staff.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, you're totally right. I'm so sorry. And then he was gracious enough just to follow it up with, well, so what's going on there? Do you sense this call in your life? And so I was able to process that with him. And that's what led to the starting of the Sunday night.
And so the idea of servanthood and stewardship, that it is not just holding it to myself and trusting that God will somehow surprisingly bring all this to pass. It's okay to look for opportunities to steward and invest my gifts within the body of Christ.
In fact, if you don't step out and try, you'll never know. And so let's say you're currently serving in one avenue, but you really think this is where you want to head. You've got to take that step. You've got to do those low-cost probes of saying, I'm not going to abandon my current responsibilities, but I want to find ways to really test that this is another thing. And then what happens is it's a matter of ratios, so that over time you may do less and less of this thing and more of this other thing, and then all of a sudden that becomes your main thing.
And the low-cost probe, if you don't do that, you're kind of burying the gift in a napkin into the ground, to take the metaphor from the New Testament.
Yes.
So a parting shot, these ministry practicum graduate students, some of them know clearly what they're doing, others are trying to sort it out. Maybe just a word to the wise.
I think it's very hard to discern where the Lord is calling you if you are not serving. And so it's never the wrong thing to say, well, let me just start here. I know the trap in church ministry is once you get started in one vein of ministry, you might feel like you have to do that ever after.
Like a life sentence.
Yeah, like a life sentence. Like, oh no, I'm in the nursery now forever. But I do think it's very hard to discern God's calling and gifts on your life in this sort of monastic enclave where it's like, just show me, Lord. I think more often how it happens is you're on the go and you've already said yes, and in the process of saying yes, God makes more things develop.
I like that. In the process of saying yes, God makes it known. Thank you, Pastor Glenn, so much for talking to our students.
Thank you, Dr. Todd.
God bless you.